morning. My apologies. I'm going to call this November 7th, 2024 meeting of the Mojave County Public Lands and Recreation Commission to order. I think Commissioner Barlow, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Madam Clerk, if we could have a roll call, please.
All right. Chairman Lingenfelter.
Here.
Commissioner Barlow.
Here.
Commissioner Smith. All right. Looks like he's not on. Commissioner Diaz.
Here.
And Commissioner Martin was just on Teams. Let me reach out on phone for him. And if we need him on phone. Well, until we have him.
Thank you, everybody, for your patience. We did have confirmation from Commissioner Martin that he was going to be attending remotely.
And he has been in and out. So
And we need to have him for quorum. I don't think anybody else is.
As soon as he's on, we'll have a quorum.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, is Don available?
I had him on this hand.
It is. I figured I could have him on the meeting on the phone. I would speakerphone if he needs to speak. If his Teams is no longer on, and without him, it's not a forum. So. He was, yeah. Because it didn't start till 10. So if he could get back in that, and then we'll have a quorum as soon as I can confirm that he's in there. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye. He's going to log in, and I will let y'all know as soon as he's on here. And Director Latowski is out. So just as soon as we get that, thank you everyone
great.
else for attending.
Yep, thank you again for your patience. Appreciate it, everybody.
There he is. Commissioner Martin? If you could unmute yourself and then just say here. I'm trying to unmute you. He is on. We can't, but so we have quorum.
You do have quorum
Yes.
now. Okay, thank you. That leads us to item 4 on our agenda. We're very thankful have Amanda Dotson with the Kingman Office of the BLM with us this morning. Thank you for attending today. We have a presentation by the BLM on the first Taylor Grazing Act. You want to come up to the podium? Thank you again for being here today. We really do appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for the invitation to allow us to provide you some information on the Public Lands Rule and the Taylor Grazing Act. I am Amanda Dodson, Field Manager for the Kingman Field Office here, and this is Philip Cooley. He is the Branch Chief for Biological Resources. I was just going to ask, so on the slides I have Public Lands Rule first. Do you want, we can flip to the Taylor Grazing Act. That starts on the bottom of the 4th page if you want to do that first, or does the order matter?
No, what I'll do, if I could ask you guys to speak into the microphone just for the people that are watching, but what I'll do as the chair is what we'll do is we'll do item 5 first.
Okay.
Which is a presentation by the Bureau of Land Management on the Public Lands Management Act, and then we'll go into the Taylor Grazing
Okay,
Act after
perfect.
that.
Thanks
So,
for being flexible. I
yeah,
appreciate
of course.
it.
So go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So, so the Public Lands Rule is formally the Conservation and Landscape Health Act, but we've been referring to it as the Public Lands Rule, and that's how I'll be referring to it moving forward. So it was first published in the Federal Register on April 3rd, 2023, and it had an extensive public comment period, as well as internal input from the BLM, and concepts in that rule were refined, clarifying the rule. The final rule was published on May 9th of this year and went into effect of June 10th. So it is very new for BLM. We are still receiving guidance from BLM headquarters for preliminary and permanent implementation. The focus of this presentation is really going through the highlights of the regulations that are now in place because of this Public Lands Rule. And during the presentation, if you have questions regarding specific points, you can go ahead and ask them during the presentation, or if you want to hold comments until after, that's fine. I have Philip up here with me, just because this is new to me. I'm not 100% familiar with it, so if I can't answer a question, if Philip can, he'll jump in, and we'll just kind of tag team on that to provide you the best information we can.
Thank you, Amanda. I think we'll let you go through your presentation, and then if any of the commissioners have questions, we can ask.
Okay.
We can ask those.
All right, thank you. All right, so going on to slide 3. So for the purposes and objectives, the BLM's management of public lands on the basis of multiple use and sustained yield relies on healthy landscapes and resilient ecosystems. The purpose of this part is to promote the use of conservation to ensure ecosystem resilience and prevent permanent impairment or unnecessary or undue degradation of public lands. This part discusses the use of protection and restoration actions, as well as tools such as watershed condition assessments, land health evaluations, inventory, assessment, and monitoring. And I'll be going through those points in a little more detail in the coming slides. So the new regulations focus on 3 main points, which is protection of intact landscapes, restoring degraded habitats and ecosystems, and making informed management decisions based on science, data, and indigenous knowledge. So on to slide 4, the Public Lands Rule at subpoint 6102.1 directs BLM to manage certain landscapes to protect their intactness. And protecting intactness requires 1, maintaining ecosystem resilience and habitat connectivity through conservation actions, habitat and ecosystem restoration projects when managing compatible uses by maintaining or mimicking natural disturbance and coordinating and implementing actions to protect intact landscapes across BLM programs, offices, and partners. So specifically, section 6102.2 lays out how BLM will protect and manage intact landscapes by requiring BLM to maintain an inventory of landscape intactness as a resource value using watershed condition assessments to establish a consistent baseline condition. When BLM updates resource management plans, BLM will identify and delineate intact landscapes for management, and BLM will prioritize acquisition of lands that would further protect and connect intact landscapes and functioning ecosystems. So on to slide 5. The public land rule directs BLM to emphasize restoration across public lands to achieve its multiple use and sustained yield mandate. So how will we do that? The authorized officers, which is typically the field manager for that office, must identify measurable and quantifiable restoration outcomes consistent with the restoration principles stated in 6102.3 in all resource management plans. The authorized officers will, at least every 5 years, identify priority landscapes for restoration consistent with resource management plan objectives and the resource principles stated in 6102.3, which I'll be going through in just a minute. For priority landscapes, the BLM, at least every 5 years, must develop or amend restoration plans consistent with the resource management plan objectives. And the BLM must track restoration implementation and progress towards achieving goals at appropriate scales. So the bullets for the guiding principles for restoration actions under 6102.3, BLM is to address the causes for degradation, focus on process-based solutions, and where possible, maintain attributes and resource values associated with the potential or capability of the ecosystem. Second, ensure that actions are designed, implemented, and monitored at appropriate spatial and temporal scales using suitable treatments and tools to achieve desired outcomes. 3, use an interdisciplinary and collaborative approach, which includes coordinating and implementing actions across BLM programs with partners and in consideration of existing uses to develop holistic restoration actions. 4, ensure incorporation of locally appropriate best management practices, high-quality information, and adaptive management that supports restoration. 5, identify opportunities to implement nature-based or low-tech restoration activities and use seed from native plants, and consult with tribes to identify opportunities for co-stewardship or collaboration. So slide 6, I'm discussing restoration and mitigation leasing. So restoration and mitigation leases provide BLM another way to work with partners to restore degraded public lands and to implement a suite of mitigation measures related to land use authorizations for major projects on public lands. The authority of these leases is codified under subpart 6102.4 of this Act and the Public Lands Rule, of the Public Lands Rule. However, processing an application for a restoration or mitigation lease will generally follow the 43 CFR 2920 process, which is a realty action for leases, permits, and easements. So in order for an individual to apply and potentially receive a restoration or mitigation lease, the applicant must be a qualified leaseholder. The proposed lease will be subject to NEPA review or review under the National Environmental Policy Act. It must conform with our land use plan, which is the same as the resource management plan, and other applicable laws such as the Endangered Species Act and the National Historic Preservation Act. The lease proposal must promote desired future conditions consistent with the management objectives described in the applicable RMP or other land use planning documents. The rights authorized in a restoration or mitigation lease do not include exclusive use of the lands under the lease, and assessed rent should reflect that constraint. So proposed activities in a restoration or mitigation lease must be compatible with existing authorizations and uses, which includes grazing. So a restoration or mitigation lease cannot be used to supplant grazing leases. I just wanted to emphasize that because I think that's been a lot of the concern and some of the questions that I've heard generally regarding this portion of the public lands rule. So slide 7. So the final rule in subpart 6102.5 would set forth a framework for the BLM to make management decisions based on science and data and indigenous knowledge. The framework requires the authorized officer to identify priority watersheds, landscapes, and ecosystems that require protection and restoration efforts, develop and implement mitigation, monitoring, and adaptive management strategies to protect resilient ecosystems, and engage in meaningful consultation with tribes and identify opportunities for tribal co-stewardship. And this also includes using indigenous knowledge in decision-making. So slide 8 for mitigation. This section requires regulations for mitigation to address adverse impacts in the case of important, scarce, or sensitive resources to the maximum extent possible. BLM is now authorized to use third-party mitigation fund holders to facilitate compensatory mitigation. A third party may be a state or local government agency or a qualified nonprofit organization. For slide 9, BLM will develop national land health standards that provide for conformance with the fundamentals of land health across all ecosystems managed by the BLM. Through this process, the BLM will develop a framework of national indicators that will be used to conduct watershed condition assessments and evaluate land health standards at landscape scales. Previously, we had been doing evaluating land health. Sometimes they were just at grazing allotment levels or grouping maybe a couple of adjacent allotments. This provides to look at the context in a broader scale. So we'd be looking at a larger geographic area moving forward. The BLM will amend or replace the currently established land health standards, which are found in geographically distinct sets of standard and guidelines, and develop additional sets of standards when necessary to evaluate the health of all lands that BLM manages. And state directors may adopt state, local, or regional sets of 19 standards that incorporate the national standards and indicators while addressing local habitats, ecosystem dynamics, and/or additional resources of concern that may be present for that area. So on to slide 10. Watershed condition assessments will utilize a nationally consistent approach and publicly available data, including standardized core indicators for all lands and program areas. So BLM must complete watershed condition assessments and use information to protect intact landscapes, inform land use planning, inform restoration planning, and manage for ecosystem resilience and compliance with land health evaluations. And for slide 10, the regulations that provide for resource management planning already address the designation of areas of critical environmental concern. There are currently many ACECs, is the abbreviation for that, designated throughout Mojave County from our current standing resource management plans, for the Kingman Field Office and the Arizona Strip. So these regulations were expanded with the public lands rule and emphasize that the authorized officer must identify eligible ACECs early in this resource management planning process when such actions fall within the scope of resource management plan amendments, which includes analyzing inventory, assessment, and monitoring data, reevaluating existing ACECs to determine if relevant and important values are still present and in need of special management attention, and seek ACEC nominations during scoping from state and local governments, Indian tribes, and other federal agencies. So ACECs must meet following criteria to be designated, which is the relevance, importance, and special management attention. So the relevance are areas that contain important historic, cultural, or scientific values, fish or wildlife resources, or other natural systems or processes. Importance has qualities of special worth, consequence, meaning, distinctness, or cause of concern, national or more than local importance, subsistence value, or regional contribution of a resource, value, system, or process, or contributes to ecosystem resilience, landscape intactness, or habitat connectivity. Special management attention, where management prescriptions are required to protect and prevent irreparable damage to the relevant and important values. BLM may designate research natural areas as an ACEC if it meets that ACEC criteria. So the biggest change that I saw through this is that now BLM can receive nominations outside of the planning process. If BLM receives any of those nominations, the local office will work with our district and the state office. And ultimately, the state director will assess if the ACEC meets the criteria that I outlined above. And if yes, we would initiate the land use planning process to evaluate that, or provide temporary management consistent with the applicable resource management plan to protect the relevant and important values from irreparable damage until we can go through the full resource management plan review for that with the public input and everything. So those are kind of the highlights that I wanted to hit for the presentation today. If you have questions, I'll be happy to take those and hopefully answer some.
Well, thank you for that presentation. We do have questions. We're going to start off with Commissioner Diaz. I believe you had some questions.
Yes, I have a few questions. Thank you for the presentation. You had said something I missed it. You said you made a clarification on the point. You said you had a lot of questions about it. I didn't get what you were talking about. You said you wanted to reiterate something because you got a lot of questions about it. You wanted to clarify.
Yes, let me go back to that. So some of the concerns that I've heard is regarding the ability for restoration and mitigation leases. And some folks have the impression that those type of leases could be put in place to eliminate grazing in certain areas. And I just wanted to clarify that that is not true. So the restoration and mitigation leases have to, I guess, maybe complement the grazing lease. They can't be used in place of that. So, some concerns that folks have that this public lands rule could be used to eliminate grazing from areas is not accurate. And I just wanted to clarify that point. And
then the other question I have is, there's been a lot of concern about people in Mohave County and other counties that I talk to people about, is that the BLM is trying to add conservation as a use of the land instead of, recreation and this is not doing that, is it?
Right. I went through.
And let me clarify, because most of us up here, I don't want to speak for everybody, but most people I talk to, conservation is not a use. But go ahead.
Right. So I went through the regulations, and hopefully you saw that with these, with the public lands rule, is trying to do is identify areas that either need restoration or need more attention just for intact landscapes on that standpoint. So the only use part in here is the restoration and mitigation leasing, or BLM would actually have an action with an applicant. The other processes kind of complements what BLM currently does, but does put more of an emphasis on identifying those landscapes and making sure when we do have other uses or requests that come in that we take a hard look at the appropriateness for some actions in those areas.
Okay, and then was this done by an executive order by our current president, or was this something that was passed by Congress and then signed by the president?
You want to answer that?
Yes, sir. This was actually through our rulemaking process. It is a regulation. Same process as like grazing regs or anything else like that. It's part of our Code of Federal Regulations now.
Okay, and then you mentioned, I have a few questions, Travis. So you mentioned on there would be a hierarchy that's going to decide the mitigation hierarchy. So who's the who would that hierarchy? Who's part of that hierarchy? Give me an example. Who would be involved with that? You said you're going to provide a full mitigation hierarchy to avoid, minimize, and compensate as appropriate for adverse impact to the resources.
So I think that's just BLM looking at the full range of opportunities that we have to address mitigation needs, and looking at what the proposal is that may require mitigation and maybe adjusting, working with the applicant to see if they can make changes to their proposal so there may not need to be as much mitigation. So it's not a hierarchy in that sense. I think the word is used just to try to encompass the full scale of how BLM can work with the proponent and through the National Environmental Policy Act, through public outreach and comments to try to get to the best mitigation strategy for that project.
Okay. And then you mentioned prioritizing land acquisitions to further protect and connect intact landscape. So when you purchase something, that's when you acquisition. Is that from private property or Arizona State Trust lands? What land are you buying? What are you talking about?
Typically, it's been from willing sellers.
Private sellers?
Yeah. Yep. So in my experience, it's been from willing sellers or corporations, or like the Wilderness Society may acquire lands in wilderness areas and then work with BLM for that acquisition. I don't think it has involved state lands, to my knowledge. And some of these also include, like when BLM does land exchanges for different projects. One of the ones that we had several years ago was with Freeport-McMoRan, where they wanted to acquire lands, I think, in southeastern Arizona from BLM, but they had lands in Mojave County that we were able to receive through that exchange. So it's with willing
questions.
sellers.
So bear with me.
Oh, you're fine.
Who designation of ACEC? Who designates that?
So that would be designated through the individual that actually signs the decision record for the resource management plan. Typically, that would be at the field manager level or district manager level. So it is at a local level. But
so if someone disagrees with that designation, what's the process? Like, say you want to make it ACEC. They say, no, that's not ACEC. That's more of like, so how does that go? What happens there?
It would follow the normal appeal process that BLM has for decisions. So it would be an appealable decision.
Okay, I think I'm good. Thank you.
You bet. I believe we do have Commissioner Smith on the phone. Commissioner Smith, if you are there, do you have any questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Martin, I think you're on the line. Do you have any questions? Oh, okay. Commissioner Barlow.
Yeah, I was just wondering if we could get an example of what is an ACEC scenario. So for the Kingman Field Office, we currently have
many. I'm not sure how much, but just geographically, just west of Kingman, there's an ACEC over the Black Mountains, which is designated, due to the high quality bighorn sheep habitat, cultural resources there. That's pretty large. It also overlays the wilderness areas for that. We have ACEC along Burrow Creek for the riparian habitat considerations, for the high quality of habitat there, and as well as desert tortoise habitat in that area. So most of ours are related to biological resources, either animal habitat or riparian habitat along the few rivers that we have. For cultural resource considerations are the ones that we have, but there are multiple ones that are currently designated in our resource management plan that was signed in the mid-90s. But it's all a public process. So even if somebody would nominate an area of critical environmental concern, and it would go state director review and say, yes, it could potentially merit that designation, it is still a very public process with, public comment and review associated with that. So it wouldn't just be a blanket decision signed on the side that nobody would know about. I just wanted to make that point. It would be public on that review.
Other questions? No. Thank you, Amanda. I have just a couple of questions myself. On the first slide, would you be able to further define the BLM's definition of intact landscapes? What goes into determination of what constitutes an intact landscape?
I don't want to speak out of turn with that because I'm sure it has like a very defined definition. Let me research that and get
Appreciate
that to you.
that.
I would expect it's pretty concise on that. So I'll email that to the
I
group.
asked the question because when you're dealing with government, words matter.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
That's why I asked that. Thank you for that. And then on the third slide, I had a question with regard to these restoration and mitigation leases. I think you're exactly right. There's been a lot of perhaps concern that that these will lead to some of the other multiple uses on our public lands from being restricted. I know that you said that, and I heard that that they have to be compatible with grazing leases that are existing, but as far as other types of multiple uses of our public lands, that there's some concern that those other uses may be restricted. Do you see scenario where some of those other uses may lead to this new rule may lead to new restrictions on outdoor lifestyle type of uses and things like that?
It should complement it. The regulations specifically say that they must be compatible with existing authorizations and uses. Existing uses do include recreation and other aspects. So with reading the regulation in that standpoint, it should be compatible with that.
Okay, great. It's obviously, as you know, a very large part of our economy here in Mojave
Absolutely.
County. So, and then who would be eligible? What's the eligibility for these restoration and mitigation leases?
So they need to be a qualified leaseholder. I think the one point that I saw is like they can't owe back taxes to the IRS or something like that. So I think it's very broad who could actually qualify for that. But when somebody would apply, let's say for a restoration lease, they would go through, BLM's full process that we use when we process realty actions, because that's how this would ultimately be authorized. So they would be going through that full review before we would even accept the application that they would be qualified to hold it.
Did the rule add any new eligible users or applicants?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. And then regarding the subpart 1610.7-2, the ACEC criteria, it sounds like they were amended. Where would the nominations come from? I'm still a little unclear on where those nominations would come from. Could they come from places like Sierra Club or?
Yeah, potentially, I think there would be no restriction on who could nominate an ACEC. It could come from a nonprofit. It could come from city or county government. I don't think there was any restriction identified who could nominate it. They would just have to identify why they're nominating it through that criteria for BLM to review that and see if that'd be something that we would look at to move forward.
And then I'm sorry, I did miss one question on the mitigation. One of the points here says that it identifies requirements for compensatory mitigation banks, and third-party mitigation fund holders. Would you give us an example of third-party? Because that's new, right? The third-party mitigation fund holders. Who is that, or what would that be?
So that would be, just to be hypothetical, let's say something is authorized that utilizes high-quality desert tortoise habitat. So this codifies it to make it an option that applicant who's getting that lease or whatever would have to offset the loss of that habitat, through whatever that is assessed at for monetary funds. This third party means that that applicant can work with BLM and the third party to get that money to the third party for them to, potentially either acquire lands to offset that, or do other types of activities that would offset the loss of that habitat in that part. So it gives another mechanism for that, for some other type of conservation or action for the loss of the habitat in that specific area.
And I think I heard you say that process matters, right? And all these things, as this rule is played out in the real world, that there's going to be ample public process for citizens to participate.
Right. So the mitigation portion of this would be included in the review and the National Environmental Policy Act review that BLM does normally for projects. This would be, apparent in the, let's just say like in the environmental assessment or EIS, if mitigation is required, for BLM to reach a decision for that, the outline of that required mitigation would be in that document, which would be available for public review, especially for environmental assessments and environmental impact statements going out for public review for that.
Great. We do allow people to sign up request to speak forums on our items. We do have one person that wishes to ask questions, have 3 minutes on this item. So
Okay.
We'll just ask that you maybe step aside. They have questions for you, and then you can come back to the podium and answer their questions. If I could ask Jessica Wentz to come to the podium, please. And if you could state your name and address, I appreciate it. Good morning.
Sure. My name's Jessica Wentz. I live at 481 West Vac Canyon Road in Kingman, Arizona, 86409.
Thank you.
Chairman Diaz brought this up about the use, the conservation use, and that's what I was concerned about, the conservation use. And Chairman brought up the recreational use, and that's kind of what I'm concerned about with the BLM making conservation and restricting the public lands access for the residents and the visitors of the county, because it is a big draw. So I don't know if you can elaborate on that.
Great. Yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you.
I don't know if I have a whole lot to add. on that point, as I said, the regulations say that it must be a compatible use. Most of the decisions being made for this area is going to be made locally by the field manager. Somebody in my position, and well aware of the needs and desires of the folks that live in Mojave County and visit Mojave County. So that would be, heavily weighed in looking at, these type of proposals. And again, these type of leases would go through a public process, which would allow for public review and comment on that. And this is, again, I'll emphasize, kind of as I said at the beginning, this is new. I mean, this just came out in January. To my knowledge, for BLM Arizona, we haven't had any requests for this to kind of feel out how we're going to move forward, how this is really going to work out. But at least, from my standpoint and my role, knowing the concern and importance for this, definitely will make sure that it is a public process and things aren't happening on the side, so that public is able to participate and be aware of what's being proposed and see if that will work, or if some things need to be changed to make it function for the needs.
Great, thank you. I know that you live here too, Amanda, so I know that you get it. And maybe the citizen that we have here today, if they have some, really specific questions for you, that they can meet with you offline and chat with you a little
Absolutely.
bit more.
Yep.
Commissioner Diaz.
Just a scenario that could come up. So let's say there's a area that someone wants to designate as an ACEC, and it's used for side-by-siding and mountain biking and hiking, and there's a public input, as you say, and then the people that are going to be making the final decision after the public input, are they unelected people, or just people that are just work for BLM? That's the concern. We have unelected people that will make the final decision that could affect our current uses.
In most cases, I anticipate it would be the person in my position, which would be the field manager, and I'm not a
See, that's the
elected
concern. Yeah, 'cause
individual.
it passes ACEC. Well, you can no longer do side-by-sides. You can no longer do mountain biking. You can't hike. You can't
Right.
camp.
I'll just emphasize for that. So we currently have multiple ACECs in the field office. In the Black Mountains, there isn't restriction. Folks can still use existing roads and trails for that area. So I don't want you to have the impression that a designation for an area of critical environmental concern equates to a wilderness area where there is no motorized activity. Even though ACECs have a higher level of designation, because there are special resources there, does not close public access to that area. I mean, wildernesses aren't closed to public access. You just can't use motorized access, but you can still hike and everything there. Yep.
So, because we have so many acres of public lands in Mojave County, and because we interface so closely, I'm going to open it up to staff to see if they have questions as well.
Absolutely.
Director Bolton.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. One question I would have, just on a staff perspective, do you happen to have a map of all these ACECs within Mojave County that you could share with us, that
Yes.
we could have on file or use for just referencing? That's like on a GIS map.
Yes, there is. Yeah, I can share the GIS information with you that has that. Yep.
Perfect. That'd be great.
Any other questions?
I think all my other questions were answered.
Aaron, any questions?
None of this stuff.
Okay. Sorry about that. Director Palmer.
Thank you, Supervisor. I have a question. So, Amanda, regarding the inventory process, is this going to be sort of classified like you would a VRM, where you have different levels of sensitivity, and then do they have to be consistent with the nomination? So, say we decide we want to nominate a swath of land for to mitigate for future maybe solar or other projects. does it have to be consistent with your assessment of the sensitivity or the intactness of the landscape?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
I think it's a bit too new. Philip, you don't, okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, it could be a tool that the county could use in the future to say, hey, we want to protect as much of our land as possible. We could go apply for some mitigation leases and preserve some landscapes that we feel are of value to us.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Great question. Anything else before we move on to the next item? Seeing none, we're going to move up to item 4, which is a presentation by the Bureau of Land Management on the Taylor Grazing Act.
Good morning. Again, just to reintroduce myself, Philip Cooley. I'm the branch chief for biological resources for the BLM at the Arizona State Office. And if I could just, I wanted to share a quote from our state director, Ray Suazo, regarding the public land rule. And he has been very adamant that BLM Arizona is not going to just go full speed ahead implementing this rule. We want to make sure that whatever happens is best for Arizona. So as Amanda just answered with the last question there, we don't know yet. We want to make sure that we are doing the best thing we can for the lands in Arizona. So I just wanted to make sure y'all knew where our state director stood on that. Just wanted to give a quick overview of Taylor Grazing Act. Taylor Grazing Act was passed in 1934. And the purpose of the Taylor Grazing Act, or TGA, was to stop injury to the public grazing lands by preventing overgrazing and soil deterioration, to provide for the orderly use, improvement, and development to stabilize the livestock industry. Prior to the passage of the Taylor Grazing Act, the West was full of range wars. The cattlemen and the sheepmen couldn't get along. Whoever got there first got the grass. So that's where this whole act came from. Just wanted to hit a couple of the high points on what Taylor Grazing Act does authorize and does require of BLM. Beginning with Section 1. This authorizes the Secretary of the Interior at their discretion, to establish grazing districts from the public domain lands, from the vacant lands that were out there. And these lands had to be identified as chiefly valuable for grazing. Sorry, I think the next slide would be slide number 16. If y'all are trying to follow along, I do apologize for skipping that. Wanted to skip over to Section 3 of the Taylor Grazing Act. This is where BLM gets the authority to issue grazing permits for a term not to exceed 10 years for these identified grazing districts. And it's important to understand that Taylor Grazing Act districts do not overlap with our current BLM district boundaries. Like there is not a Taylor Grazing Act district for the Colorado River District. There are some requirements identified in Section 3 for who can get a permit. Have to be a settler or resident that owns livestock. That's a very important part of this. They have to own livestock. Have to be a citizen of the United States or in the process of gaining citizenship. And then priority, or sometimes you may hear BLM refer to this as preference, is giving to people within the districts. That are, landowners are engaged in the livestock industry. So this was important that they, at the passage of Taylor Grazing Act, to make sure that the local folks that were currently out there grazing were the first ones to get those grazing permits. And then the final thing I want to highlight for Section 3 is this is where we get the authority and are required to collect the payment of the grazing fees for use on these grazing permits. The next slide talks a little bit about Section 4. And this is what authorizes the BLM to issue either a range improvement permit or enter into a cooperative agreement for the construction of range improvements. This would be the fencing, water sources, water troughs, things like that for the orderly use of the grazing while they're out there on public lands. Next slide, skip over to Section 15 of the Act. And this allows us to issue grazing leases for the lands outside of the Taylor Grazing Act districts. So these are normally smaller tracts of BLM land. It might be 40 acres of BLM wrapped up into a larger ranch unit. So there is a difference between a grazing permit and a grazing lease. On the next slide, just wanted to talk a little bit about the grazing fees. We do recalculate the grazing fees annually. This is based on a formula that was put together during the Reagan years. This was put together during the Reagan administration. It's based on various factors, including the cost of livestock production, beef cattle prices, and the cost of private land lease rate within the state that the grazing is occurring. The minimum fee is $1.35. So no matter what the fee calculation comes out to, we cannot charge less than $1.35. And then again, no matter what the fee calculates out to, we cannot adjust the fee more than 25% from the previous year. So trying to keep some stability in the livestock market for our public land operators. Sure. So thank you, Amanda. So Amanda just asked if I could clarify what we charge the $1.35 for. And we do charge the $1.35 for an animal unit month, or what we refer to as an AUM. And BLM's definition of an AUM does not match what you learn in college in grazing management. It is roughly based on that definition. It is based on the occupancy of the land for a mother cow and her calf for 1 month. So the classical definition is the actual amount of forage consumed by the cow and her calf for 1 month. We don't go out and actually measure forage. We're doing it if the cow is out there. We are charging for the occupancy, assuming they're consuming that much forage. So I hope that clarified what that $1.35 is charged for. The next slide talks about how, when we collect this money, what do we do with it? So the money collected on Section 3 lands through our grazing permits is a little bit different, handled a little bit different than the money we collect on our Section 15 or our grazing leases. For the money collected on Section 3 lands, 37.5% of that money is returned to the Treasury. 12.5% of that money comes back to the state and ultimately back to the county where that money was generated. And then 50% of that money goes back to BLM in the form of our range improvement, or what we call our 8100 funds. For Section 15 land, Treasury does not get any of that money. Half of it comes back to the state. Half of it goes to our 8100 funds. As far as the money that comes back to the state, the Taylor Grazing Act requires that the state determine how that money is spent. I can tell you that for Mojave County, the state does send all that money to the county. And our office, our state range program lead, works with the county here to make sure they understand how much money was generated for the previous year. And because there are 2 field offices involved, the Arizona Strip and Kingman, make sure that the money is split out between those 2 offices within the county here. Just wanted to give a few stats of the grazing operations within Mojave County. So for the Kingman Field Office, there are currently 82 grazing allotments. Those allotments, there are 77 grazing authorizations, and we are currently authorizing about 130,000 AUMs across all those allotments. So the difference in number of authorizations for allotments, there are some authorizations that have multiple allotments on them. So I'm Don't know the exact number, but I'm sure the majority of those 82 are on a current grazing authorization. Within the Arizona Strip, I wasn't able to get the numbers split out specifically for Mojave County, but for Arizona Strip, there are 144 grazing allotments, 136 active grazing authorizations, and we're currently authorizing about 178,000 AUMs on the Strip. Out of those numbers, about half of those allotments are in Mojave County. The other half in Coconino, and there may be a few up in Utah. Maybe rough numbers, maybe half of those AUMs are generated in Mojave County. So that is the information I had to present this morning on TGA. Be glad to try to answer any questions you may have.
Excuse me. Thank you for the presentation. We're just going to go through the commissioners. Commissioner Smith, if you're on the line, do you have any questions?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioner Barlow. Okay. Commissioner Diaz.
Comments.
So we have field offices in Lake Havasu, Yuma. There are 2 field offices in Phoenix, Hassayampa, Lower Sonoran. Oh, just Mojave County? Mojave County would just be the Strip and Kingman. Havasu does have a couple? Okay, so just the 3. I'm sorry. I can get the information for Lake Havasu. It's very minimal, but I can get that information for you. So that range improvement money is intended for primarily new infrastructure, be it allotment boundary or pasture fencing, water developments, be a well, it could be a dirt stock tank, a pipeline, cattle guards, anything that would help would benefit the grazing program. Yes.
I'm going to open it up to staff as well. Director Holtree.
It's more of just a personal question. What does chiefly valuable for grazing mean?
That is something that's kind of been argued for a long time. That was 1934 language, and so I think what they were trying to get at was if the land was currently being grazed, they wanted to make sure that it was covered under this newly created act, and those ranchers had the opportunity to form the grazing districts.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Aaron, any questions from you? No? Okay. No, that was a really important discussion and presentation. I know that ranching has been part of our historical fabric here in Mojave County for a long, long time. So appreciate the discussion. Anything else before we? No? I want to thank you, sir, and thank you, Amanda, for attending our meeting today. Two very informative presentations, and I want to thank you both very much for coming and giving those to us.
Thank you for your time this morning as well.
Thank you. We're going to move on to item 6, commissioner comments and requests for agenda items for next meeting. We'll go right down the line. Commissioner Barlow? Nothing? Commissioner Smith?
Nothing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Diaz?
Can we get an update on we had a item a few months ago, or the 2 reservoirs were going to generate power. I don't remember the name off the top.
Yeah, it's
Where that's what's the
it's
status
a Red
of that?
Lake
Yes.
pump storage project that's being proposed mostly on public lands. I would say, yes, we can. We'd probably bring Amanda, invite her back to give an update at some point. It's not on our agenda, so we can't really formally talk about it, but I would say catch her and see where that's up. I know that, that the BLM has just heard that they've provided comments on that. Mojave County's provided comments on that. And it's obviously on the top of our, it's right in the middle of our radar screen because a lot of people are concerned with that. So we'll definitely put that on an agenda. I don't think that Commissioner Martin is able to chat, but we'll reach out to him to see if he has any items for the next meeting as well. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Hearing none, I want to thank you everybody for attendance today. Thank you everybody for coming today, and this meeting is adjourned.